reports that Afghan villagers have been offering one theory about what might have motivated his rampage.
I'm putting another video together about the latest Afghanistan massacre, which is part of an illegitimate war in Afghanistan, because you don't use the military and war against terrorism. I'll point out how this guy's acting like the Afghan witnesses just suddenly started talking about American troops coming by and threatening them, threatening retaliation for a U.S. soldier getting hurt by an IED. An improvised explosive device.
Our Pentagon correspondent Jim Miklaszewski on duty from there tonight. Jim, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. And another twist to this tragic story. Villagers where the shootings took place are now claiming that the 16 civilians were gunned down in retaliation for an IED attack against American forces. The villagers claim that days before the massacre, American combat troops entered that village and threatened to kill every man and their children for that attack on the Americans. But Pentagon and military officials said today there is no evidence of any IED attack around that time and no evidence the Americans threatened retaliation. In fact, officials here at the Pentagon suspect this is nothing more than propaganda.
This guy is taking the word of the Pentagon and ignoring statements reported before this report. He's so willing to push the Pentagon line that he's ignoring stories that already have been reported about an IED attack, and that the suspect was upset about that. He ignores what already has been reported, information that was coming from the suspect's own lawyer. And meanwhile, Jim accepts the Pentagon story and labels what the Afghan people are saying as propaganda. Do you think he would ever call what the U.S. says propaganda? Do you think he would ever talk about U.S. government statements being criticized as propaganda? Do you think ever in a million years this man would say, by the way, the U.S. government has a pattern of lying, even though it's the truth? Dramatically, it's the truth that the U.S. government has a pattern of lying even about military affairs.
The bare minimum we owe our soldiers and their families is the truth. That didn't happen for two of the most famous soldiers in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. For Jessica Lynch and Pat Tillman, the government violated its most basic responsibility. Sensational details and stories were invented in both cases. In Jessica Lynch's case, the Washington Post published a front-page story 10 days after her capture that discarded the facts and misled the country. PFC Jessica Lynch, rescued Tuesday from an Iraqi hospital, fought fiercely and shot several enemy soldiers after Iraqi forces ambushed the Army's 507th Ordnance Maintenance Company, firing her weapon until she ran out of ammunition, U.S. officials said yesterday. Lynch, a 19-year-old supply clerk, continued firing at the Iraqis even after she sustained multiple gunshot wounds and watched several other soldiers in her unit die around her in fighting March 23, one official said. Where did this false information come from? Jessica Lynch was captured on March 23. The Washington Post published a completely factual article on her rescue on April 2nd. But then they went on, 10 days after her capture, U.S. officials had become the source of a report that riveted the nation, but twisted the truth beyond recognition. Everyone on this committee is also familiar with Pat Tillman's case. Pat Tillman was killed by members of his own platoon on April 22, 2004. The family has been unable to learn why the military told the world that Corporal Tillman had been killed by the enemy when in fact they knew he had died from friendly fire. News of the fratricide flew up the chain of command within days, but the Tillman family was kept in the dark for more than a month. Many military officials sat in silence during a nationally televised memorial ceremony highlighting Pat Tillman's fight against the terrorists. Evidence was destroyed. Witness statements were doctored. The Tillman family wants to know how all of this could have happened.